Okay, so to start with, we have pork loin, which I've trimmed. You can see the trimmings there. And we're going to liberally cover that with this spice rub that I made. It's salt, black pepper, cumin, and some really cool homemade chili powder from, let's see if you can see it, that I made from some padron peppers that a friend of mine from the market gave me. So we're going to coat that, and then I'll come back and show you what we do then. Okay, so we've got this liberally coated. Now we're going to tie it up just so that we can make sure that it kind of keeps its shape and stays a nice form while we cook it. So we're going to run some down to here. Can you see that? Yeah, just barely. And we're just going to go over twice, cinch it down, over twice, cinch it down. And we're going to make a loop with our hands, pull that over, pull that taut, get some extra string to work with. There we go. Pull that taut, and repeat all the way down. I'll be back once I've got that done. And then on the back you can see I just went through each of the loops from the top, looped it around the middle, and then I'm going to finish it, see how it's down here, by turning it over, pulling the string up and through the first loop, and then pulling it tight, and through the second loop, that'll just keep it a nice tidy package. And then we'll tie off to the original loop. 1, 2, tighten it down, 1, 2, tighten it down, trim the excess, and then transfer it to a rack on top of a baking dish, which I can't show you because I can't move the pork and the camera at the same time, but we'll get there in a sec. Last time I did this, I showed you a cut on some onions that I didn't describe, so this is what it is. It's called a lyonnaise cut. And so I've halved the onion down through the root. I'm going to trim the front, trim the back, and then pull the peel like this. Oops. Get rid of any of the gunk that's left. And then it's going to be a little hard to see, so let me see if I can get you a better view of how I'm doing this. Yes, look at my stomach while I cut this. So I'm going to hold the knife at an angle and just go through it and try to get them fairly small but not tiny as I go through it. These will come up later. When you get to the point that it's hard to hold, just lay it on the side, turn it around, finish your way through it. That's a lyonnaise cut. So these are our onions, to which I've added just a little bit of salt and pepper, not a whole lot, just enough that it'll kind of mix in while they cook. The salt will help them release moisture, which is part of what we're going for. Pepper's never a bad idea. I mean, unless you're allergic or something. And then we've got a rack that's going to sit over this. I'm using a dish lined with foil because I'm lazy and I don't want to do the scrubbing later. So this is the pork. You'll notice I've put some of the pieces of fat that I've trimmed off. There's this one here and that one there. I'm going to start this in a cold oven and bring it slowly up to 350. It's probably going to take about 25 minutes, but during that time this fat's going to render out and some of the juices are going to drip off the pork and take a little bit of the flavor with it, and that's going to start coating the onions. And that's going to let me have some really tasty onions to use in the black beans later. We'll get to that later. Here's our partially cooked pork and our partially cooked onions. we're gonna take some of the onions, like a big scoop or two, and toss them in a pot, a little pan. One more. We're gonna leave these sit for a minute. Spread the other ones out, and we're gonna chop up some potatoes. I've got plain old russets. You could use reds or whatever. I had russets laying around. We're gonna have those, then quarters. We're gonna take this and chop it, not super small, home fries size maybe. You can kind of see, about yay big. Don't want them too small because they'll burn. You don't want them too big because they won't cook through. Go ahead and do that to 2 potatoes or so. Toss them in the pan, put the pork back with the onions, put the pork back on, back in the oven. Alright, so we've got the potatoes in. I'm going to toss those with the rest of the dry rub. Mix that around a little. You washed your hands, right? Get them kind of coated with the grease from the pork. Mix them up with the onions. Spread them out. You kind of want one layer. It's not going to be perfect. Doesn't need to be. And then we're going to move this pork back on top. Pop that back in the oven for another 45 minutes, give or take. And while we wait for that, we're going to work on the beans. In this pan, we've got the onions from earlier and some garlic. Saute those a little bit. We'll start to build this fond on the bottom of the pan, which is delicious. They'll scorch in some places. You'll get a little bitterness. Try to avoid it. I didn't. It happens. Anyway. Yes, my stove's a little dirty. It happens. So then I'm going to try to do this one-handed. We're going to move this off of the heat. There's the burner. There's the thing. Then we're going to add some tequila. And then we're going to add that back onto the heat. Let it come up in temperature. And then we're going to scrape the edges and the bottom. We're going to scrape the edges and the bottom of the pan. Try to get all of that stuff up into our onions and garlic. Let that go for a moment. And then once almost all the liquid is gone, which probably going to take another sec. That looks about good. We're going to add some chicken stock. Mine's cold, so it's somewhat congealed, but that'll melt pretty quick, as you can see. That's going to bring the temperature in the pan down quite a bit, so we're just going to let that go until the chicken stock is almost completely reduced. Probably take 15 minutes or so. We're going to do it over low heat and just let that go. Oops, I almost forgot. We're going to add a little bit of crushed dry bay leaves. There you go. Then we'll stir that up and let it go. This is going to be the base for our black bean puree. Okay, so our onions and garlic and chicken stock have reduced to a nice consistency. The aromatics have gotten nice and soft. We're going to add a can of drained black beans. You want the chicken stock to be the liquid. It'll add some nice flavor. And we're just going to stir that up and toss in a few cilantro stems. Give it a good stir. Then we're going to cover it, keep it over a low heat, and let it go for a while. Probably another 15-20 minutes, by which time the pork should be just about done. Back in a few. Oh, And you also want to add the juice of half of a lime. Ta-da! And now it's time to pull the pork out. Oh man, that looks good. And then we're gonna rest the pork on the rack on a cutting board while we pop the potatoes and onions back in to finish. And while that finishes, we'll stare at our lovely pork. Nah, I'm kidding. We're gonna work on our beans. So I've got them covered. I'm gonna use this towel to cover off. I haven't looked at these yet, so let's see how this cut went. See them bubbling away. Give them a good stir. Yeah, that looks about good. So we're gonna stir these and then for a minute, and I'm gonna come back with my immersion blender. Meanwhile, I've chopped up some cilantro and shredded some cheese. So we're gonna use that to season the beans along with some salt and pepper. I'll be back to show you the immersion blending. Okay, I can't show you all of this because it's kind of a two-handed job, but basically you're just going to use your immersion blender, or if you don't have an immersion blender, you can totally transfer this to a food processor and do it. Basically, I'm just going to turn it on, swirl it around, get everything nice and mashed up. You should probably do it with the heat off. It's going to bubble a little, but you don't want it splattering up at you. It's going to be loud for a sec, sorry. Anyway, you get the idea. I'll be back in a minute once I actually get this done. Okay, so now we've got a nice black bean puree. It's a little chunky, but that's fine. And we're going to toss in some cilantro. If you don't like cilantro, like if you think it tastes like soap, you could substitute parsley. We're also going to add a big handful of this pepper jack cheese. You could use other cheese if you wanted. Anyway, we're going to stir that in, let it sit while we tend to slicing and prepping the pork. So we'll be back with that in a sec. Alright, we let our pork rest for a little bit. We've checked the temp, it's good. Generally want pork to hit like, officially, probably need like 155, but pork's one of those things, if you trust your pork, you can cook it medium rare. Anyway, we're just gonna, well, medium. Anyway, we're gonna pull this off, get the string out. Get rid of that. Give our hands a little wipe. And we're just gonna slice. And I'm gonna take a really small slice off the front. Looks beautiful. And then we're gonna slice about 1/2 inch thick slices. I think I'm gonna want 4. Pretty hungry. Anyway, that's about what you get. And then I'll come back in a minute and show you the potatoes and onions, and we'll build a plate. Should be fun. Should be pretty. Alright, everything's ready to go. So we're going to start with some of the black bean puree. Big old dollop right in the center. A little more. We're going to kind of spread that around. Then we're going to add some of our onions and potatoes around the edge. Then the pork, we're just going to shingle it on the center. And then we're going to take the rest of our cheese, mostly around the outside. And sprinkle some cilantro over the top. Get some on your counter. It's pretty. So, there we have it. Roasted pork with roasted potatoes and onions and black bean puree. That's dinner tonight, folks. Have fun.